So we're gonna start recording. So we're rank 40 right now, and we've had success in Versus Arena, and that's pretty much what's given me the confidence to say, look, I feel like I might actually be able to help people doing a set review of Alliance War. So let's talk about Forked Bolt. Deal 1 damage to a creature and your opponent, 0 cost spell. Actually, the audio effect sounds so weird right now. Sorry, let me fix the audio. Let's lower Legends a little bit. You can get some background music. Okay, so Forked Bolt is a card that I think a lot of people might not understand this card. So I'll just preface it by saying it's a good card in the right decks. People are putting this in combo decks, Assassin, Swindler's Markets deck, where they're basically spamming 0 cost cards. I'm sure everyone who plays Legends knows what that is now because it's been around for some time. So Forked Bolt's effective there. It also is one of the cards that comes out of Guildsword Oathman. So if we look at Oathman, Guildsword Oathman, if you have an intelligence creature in play, put a Forked Bolt into your hand. So it shows up, and when it does show up, it usually gets a lot of value. That being said, this is not the type of card you would want to put into a traditional deck. Like, you're not going to put this into a deck that's a non-combo deck, and you're not even going to put it into the deck where you have a Guildsword Oathman, because it is very low impact in itself, but it is high impact when you get it for free from Guildsword Oathman, and it's high impact in a combo deck where you need to play as many 0 cost actions as possible. So this idea of dealing 1 damage to your to a creature and your opponent, what makes dealing 1 damage to a creature good is that you'll actually oftentimes run into situations where there's a creature who only has 1 toughness left. Like, where this could be a big-bodied young mammoth 4/4 before it's been hurt. It's taken some damage and now it's 4/1. That's the situation that Forked Bolt shines the most, because it's really just a cleanup card. There are also a fair bit of cards that only have 1 toughness to begin with. The Murkwater dude. There's a Murkwater card. Let me bring him up. I usually try not to do this, but let me see. Murkwater. So this guy, Murkwater Scourge, has 1 toughness and combos really well with Forked Bolt, because what ends up happening is a player who's playing Swindler's Market would play Murkwater Scourge, and then they would want to kill their own Murkwater Scourge so they can get access to more curses, because curse is another 0 cost card. So I lost actually last weekend in a tournament to Forked Bolt being used to kill that exact creature, Murkwater Scourge or something. So Forked Bolt's flexible because it's 0 cost. It's very nice to have in hand when you have lots of cards in your hands. Like, 0 cost cards are pretty much a free card. It's a free card that can impact the board immediately, exactly precision striking exactly where you need it, when you need it. And for some of those combo decks, dealing 1 damage to your opponent's face is non-trivial because they already have so much damage. Like they might actually have, let's say a market deck might have 25 damage in hand. 1 more damage is bringing you that much closer to death. And in the case of Empower, the new keyword, Empower says every time you deal damage to your opponent, reduce the cost. Well, Empower means has multiple things to it, right? Sometimes in Spoils of War's case and Debilitate, it reduces the cost. So Forked Bolt, not only is it a free action, it can discount some spells and empower other spells to become more powerful, because when it hits your opponent's face, it's actually triggering Empower. So this card should not be seen or taken lightly. Usually, if you're in a high-level game and you see someone running Forked Bolts, you should be a little worried. You should think to yourself, man, this guy has a game plan and he knows what he's doing, because no one puts Forked Bolts into their deck without synergy. Let's give another example. Swindler's Market. It's the same example, but another way it benefits Swindler's Market. So Swindler's Market, they might have, let's say they have 1 Swindler's Market online. They play Forked Bolt. Forked Bolt itself does 1 damage to a creature, so it removes a creature, potentially. It could also deal 1 damage to your face, because that's what it reads. But then Swindler's Market also reads every time you play a 0-cost spell, deal 1 damage to your opponent and heal yourself. So this Forked Bolt suddenly, its value multiplies. It not only deals 1 damage to a creature and your opponent, it deals another damage to your opponent, and then it heals you for 1. On top of that, it's empowering the next Spoils of War and reducing that spell by 1 cost point. Not just once, but twice, because it actually hit your opponent once, right? The card itself hit them once, then Swindler's Market hit them once, so now that counts as 2 empowered triggers. So now Spoils of War will go from 5 cost to 3 cost. Now let's say you have a second Swindler's Market online. What does a Forked Bolt do? Well, in addition to what it already reads, deal 1 damage to a creature, deal 1 damage to the face, it now deals 2 damage to their face from the Swindler's Markets and heals you for 2. So it's deal 2 damage to your face, plus 1, that's 3, heal you for 2, and now, how many times does it reduce Spoils of War? 3 times. It reduces Spoils of War's magic cost by 3, making Spoils of War get even closer to being a 0-cost card, which then can trigger Swindler's Market to deal damage to them, heal you, and then empower your next spell, if there was such thing as you needed to empower more, right? That's why Forked Bolt is really an enabler for chain reactions. It's a scary card. Another thing to be said is these assassin lists are running things like Finish Off. They're not really running Leaf Lurker, it's too expensive, but Finish Off reads 2 Magicka, destroy a unit that has been hit. And when in conjunction, Forked Bolt and Finish Off basically reads kill anything almost. Because Forked Bolt can tickle your 8/8 and bring him to 8/7, and Finish Off would just kill him. So that's one of the flexible use cases of a Forked Bolt. It's a good card. Ravaging Elixir. Support, uses 3, activate, deal 1 damage to your opponent. I'm looking at this card and I'm just blanking. I don't think I've seen this card before. In what world would you want this more than a Crushing Blow? I'm trying to think to myself, in what world? So this looks like a Crushing Blow bottled into a smaller package. You're splitting up the cost. So it costs 3 times less than a Crushing Blow. At its maximum use case, it's a Crushing Blow that's limited to hitting your opponent's face. It has the potential to count as 3 triggers. So if Empower was a thing, you could trigger Empower sequentially 3 different times on 3 different turns. In conjunction with some other support abilities, you could potentially make this unlimited uses. You could use it twice per turn. So this looks like a burn support card that would a mage support deck that has unlimited supports could use. It's also really low value, so the likelihood of anybody removing this support is very low. So that's actually an interesting upside. So support removal cards: Dushnik Archer, 4 cost; Shadowfen Priest, 5 cost; Belligerent Giant, 7 cost. For them to actually target this is unlikely. So this has that sort of Ratway prospector kind of effect of basically, if you play this, it's gonna live. No one's gonna deal with it. Which is interesting because maybe this card is a sleeper, because this card, it's very low in a dual color deck that runs a lot of supports. If you had 3 of these babies online, I'm pretty sure you could do a lot of damage. In theory, let's say you had the card that said you could use this twice, and you can use unlimited time. You could do 6 damage per turn using Ravaging Elixir. And the cost is affordable. 1 Magicka's affordable cost. So I think there are combos hidden within this card that people have not explored, potentially because the market combo is dominating right now. So this card, I expect it to maybe see some kind of niche play, and although it's not being played now, it does look playable. Soul Wraith. One cost Spirit, 0/5, Prophecy Guard. Cool artwork. I've seen it do work in Arena, especially with items. A 0/5 body isn't, with guard, is nothing to exactly laugh at. Prophecies can be meaningful. It's hard for me to say that this is a good constructed card. It's an undead creature. Spirits count as undead. So potentially there is a way to squeeze value out of that you can't get from a word wall. But I don't know which world you would rather have this over Wall of Spikes. Wall of Spikes is 2 cost. Wall of Spikes can kill people, and when you put items on Wall of Spikes, it can definitely kill big targets. And it has Prophecy as well. So I don't think too highly of this card. It's draftable. You'd feel pretty bad if you had more than one of this in your Arena deck. And I can't see anyone putting this into a constructed deck. Unless, I believe there's a card that says turn the toughness of a creature into its attack. I believe that's in the purple. Steel-Eyed Visionary. Maybe there's something there. Because that 0/5 stat line for 1 cost could somehow magically become a 5/5. So that would be a little bit more of a shenanigan combo kind of trick. Could be cool. Although I would be a little concerned with a strategy that does that would have to run blue and purple. And if they did that, their card draw could be a little weird. So like if they were Sorcerer, if that was a Sorcerer deck running Steel-Eyed Visionary, Soul Wraith, one of the problems of these cheap 1-drop cards that you just splam on the ground is your hand will empty really fast, and eventually you're just like, oh, I play these cards cheaply and I don't have cards to play anymore. And Sorcerer doesn't really have great draw options. So Telvanni has, like, without access to green, they don't have amazing draw. So that's something that makes this weird is because, like, on one hand, you can benefit from getting discounted, but then you have the combo. You need a combo off to get it to 5/5, and then by the time you combo it, to get it consistently, you need to be dual color. But if you're dual color in blue and purple, you don't have card draw. And then if you don't have card draw, it's like, do you really care about discounted costs? Right? And that's when you're like, I would rather have a Ward Crafter. Please just give me a Ward Crafter. Always good. Right? And that's actually one of the things about this kind of card, is it's not always good. Like, maybe it's good sometimes. Maybe it's good rarely. But it will definitely not satisfy, this is always good, because it's conditional. It's only good when I have Steel-Eyed Visionary surviving a veteran attack, which is kind of weird, because then Soul Wraith would have been on the ground already, not attacking, and Steel-Eyed Visionary comes in at like turn 3 or 4, and in my experience, Steel-Eyed Visionaries half the time can't even get his attack off, because there are hive defenders and things that get put in his way. Altmurph, and if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to share. Altmurph Flameslinger. 2-drop, 1/3 ward. At the start of your turn, Altmurph Flameslinger deals 1 damage to your opponent. I think this card's a great card. It's a very powerful card. I've played it in Constructed, in Tournament, and in Arena, and I think it's good in every single format. Essentially, what you want to deal with, what you're trying to buy with this 2-cost Magicka card is a card that deals a lot of damage to them and is difficult to answer. And in this case, this card fills that role tremendously. 1/3 body is difficult to deal with on its own. 1/3 body with ward can be really annoying, especially with access to items. So when you're running this kind of card, you're going to be quite aggressive. So you might run it with Crown Quartermasters. So Crown Quartermasters could buff this up. You might run this in a Battle Mage deck where they have Battle Maces. You might run this into a deck where you have Tomes of Alteration. This is a card that people can't deal with very easily with 2 Magicka. Sorcerer's Negation does not even kill this. That is in itself crazy, which means this card's afraid of things like execute. Execute's 1 cost, but if this gets executed, you still feel good about it, because this Altmurph Flameslinger ate an execute that a more high value 2-attack creature would have eaten, such as a Daggerfall Mage. So Altmurph Flameslinger, if he gets eaten by execute, you feel good about it because your Daggerfall Mage didn't get eaten by execute. So he's difficult to deal with. Now, the dealing damage part, in my experience, Altmurph Flameslinger, in Assassin specifically, can get off 6-7 damage easily. In order to get 6 damage off, he just needs to live 3 turns and hit them in the face, which is not very hard with a Shadow Shift. It's not hard with Ward Crafters. It's not hard when you throw down other threats into their face. And all those little deal 1 damage to your opponent at the start of your turn, it starts adding up tremendously. Now, it also should be noted, it triggers Empower, so it would make Spoils of War cheaper, for example. So it has an Empower synergy that I have not found a way to make good use of it. I haven't put Spoils of War with this card yet, but it has that potential. I think aggressive blue decks that are trying to end the game early should be using this card. So I think this card is being underutilized by Sorcerer. A lot of Sorcerer decks don't run this card. Daggerfall Mage decks that are aggressive tend not to run this card either, although I don't think that has to be the case. I think Altmurph Flameslinger it pulls its weight. And if this card, like on a minimum level, so these are the kind of checkers. If he gets executed, I feel good about it. That's a good sign. If he gets off even 2 attacks, he's already like paid for his value. Now the upside of this guy is he has a tendency, on average, to get way more than 2 attacks in, and to take up some resources and to help fight for the board. Like, lethal creatures can't just deal with it right away. So that's why Altmer Flameslinger, I rate this card very highly. Emmerich's Warlord. Your items have mobilize. 2-drop, 1/4. When friendly recruit equips an item, Emmerich's Warlord gets +1/+0. So this card was designed with Covenant in mind, right? Emmerich is the leader of Covenant. Covenant has the most items. The tag your items have mobilized is really a retrofit. Like, it's basically affecting cards that were printed before Alliance War, because I think all the Alliance War items have mobilized. So it's basically trying to tie in older items and basically enable them to act like Alliance War cards. As a 2-drop, 1/4 is with the ability to get buffer. It's reasonable. It's playable. Like a 2-drop for a 2/5. Foreseeably, the idea is the only kind of decks that would run this are decks that would be able to easily make this a 2/5, a 3/6, etc., etc. The problem is, I can imagine that on average, with this kind of card, you would only get it to 2/5, because it reads that when a friendly recruit equips an item, Emmerich's Warlord gets +1/+0, which basically means you used Mobilize, and Mobilize is when you put an item in an empty lane, like a Steel Scimitar into an empty lane. So it's not going to be easy to put another item onto another recruit unless you put it on the same recruit, or that recruit dies. All situations which are bad. And I think putting more items onto that recruit that you first mobilize is a very bad idea because of silence. Things like Earthbone Spinner just completely destroys mobilized creatures, because mobilize is equip this item to a 1/1 creature. Earthbone Spinner says silence this creature and deal 1 damage to it. So it basically says destroy the item, then kill the recruit. So if you put 5 items onto a recruit, Earthbone Spinner would kill them in 1 shot. So this makes Emmerich's Warlord most likely to end up being a 2-drop that's a 2/5. And I'm not sure about the whole strategy of mobilizing a recruit into the other lane with Emmerich's Warlord, because in Covenant aggressive decks, which I would imagine this is the kind of card you'd like. I imagine that this card is supposed to be more an aggressive deck. You're running items, you care about stats, attack. You actually usually want to hug 1 lane. You usually want to stick to the field lane, which makes Mobilize kind of weird in this case, because Mobilize splits up your troops. So if you put Emmerich's Warlord in field lane, you put a Steel Scimitar in the shadow lane, you're actually departing from the conventional wisdom that says, hey, it's better to put more guys in the field lane and have that Steel Scimitar not used on Mobilize, because Mobilize basically says put this onto the lane and you have to wait 1 turn to develop its value. Steel Scimitars are much more valuable into a field lane where they can be used the moment they are equipped. So this makes Emmerich's Warlord awkward, because it doesn't encourage lane hugging, and it encourages you to use Steel Scimitars and similar items in a way that does not immediately yield their value. Another thing to be said, as a unique legendary, Emmerich's Warlord feels like many people have the philosophy that I don't play this card unless I have 3. Maybe it's OCD, maybe it's like I'm not even going to experiment with this card, but I think a lot of players have this kind of bias towards such cards where it's like I'm not putting one of, like, this card needs to be synergized with, and if you synergize with a card that you only have one of in a Covenant deck, the Covenant deck has 75 cards. So that makes it awkward because you're synergizing with a card that you're unlikely to draw. I wonder if Battle Mage has any synergy with this. I mean, on paper it does, but like Battle Mage has really good 2-drops. So they already have Ward Crafters. And that's how you should compete. You should always ask yourself, is this better than a Ward Crafter? Because a Ward Crafter is de facto the 2-drop from blue, from intelligence. And I think this is worse than a Ward Crafter because a Ward Crafter could put immediate pressure, and Ward Crafter is also a card that you don't mind top decking later on in a situation because it could actually help win the board state by giving ward to a much more high value target to trade into and survive. Emmerich's Warlord is definitely not a card you would like to top deck. This is a card that you need in your starting hand to get maximum value. So I would like to see a crazy combo go off with her, but I'm not aware of any such combo, and I could not in good faith recommend anyone to craft this card. If you happen to accidentally get a few of these, experiment with them, let me know how you felt about them, give them a try. But off the bat, there are much more higher priority crafts from the Alliance War set. Guildsworn Wayfarer. 2-drop, 2/2, expertise +1/+1. I like what Turquoise Link said on Twitter. He said that he grossly underestimated this card, and I believe I fall under the same camp. This card is a stud in Arena, and I think he is completely constructed playable. So when we're dealing with expertise, we should recognize expertise can trigger unlimited times. It can only trigger once per turn, but let's say turn 2 you play this. Turn 3, you can equip an item on anybody, you can play a spell on anything, and he becomes 3/3. Turn 4, you do something else, he gets buff. So he has the ability to just keep getting larger and larger. And so 2/2 for 2 is already reasonable. I mean, most people, Bruma Profiteers is like this all-star 2-drop 3/2 starts healing you, right? Guildsworn Wayfarer is not too far behind that. It only needs one trigger to really feel like you're getting maximum value. And then if you get multiple triggers, you're starting to enter net profit. Like you're starting to really squeeze out more value. You're starting to get young mammoth levels of value once you trigger him more than once. And I think expertise-based decks should be able to trigger him more than once pretty easily. So Guildsworn Wayfarer seems to be a very easy card to synergize with. It's a reasonably statted creature, very easy to get full value, and he has the ability to potentially snowball out of control. In Arena, I think I've seen him easily become like an 8/8. But you do need to be careful. So with cards like Guildsworn Wayfarer in Arena, while it's true removal spells are more sparse than in Constructed, you don't want to ever have too many eggs invested in one basket. Like, if you have items and you can equip them, and Guildsworn Wayfarer is getting bigger and bigger, he's becoming like a 4/4, he's become a 5/5, I highly recommend you do not put more items on him and you don't put anything on him. You just let him be, let him get the value he's passively generating, and use those items on other creatures, because if they hit him with a Sorcerer's Negation, you're going to lose everything you put on him. So it's better to have him as a 5/5 than an 8/8, because if he's an 8/8 and you lose him, it's going to really hurt, versus if he's a 5/5 and you lose him, it doesn't hurt that much because he naturally got himself stronger, and your opponent was forced to answer him with an additional resource. And you have that other item or whatever to add another threat vector on another creature. Channeled Storm. 3-cost action, deal 3 damage to a creature and power +1 damage. Artwork is super cool. Big fan. I wonder what... Actually, this kind of reminds... I don't know if you've played Skyrim, but my favorite thing in Skyrim was when you were a mage and you could dual wield like lightning spell, and you could like... It was like the Death Star. Like you could just... You could actually... If you had enough magicka, you could just hold your lightning bolt beam, and it's just like zzz, and it was like a laser. That thing was really cool. So that would have been a little cooler if it was like shooting out of his hands. A lot of people think very highly of this card, and I think I understand why. I think it's better than a Crushing Bolt for most control players, because Crushing Blow is usually used only on creatures. And only in very niche cases are you using it for reach to close out the game, because most control decks are just trying to build up their resources and set up for either 1-turn kills or 2-turn clocks to kill them in 2 turns. And Crushing Blow is more of a chip damage kind of ability when used to face. So Channeled Storm is better than a Crushing Blow when it comes to killing creatures, because it has the upside potential of killing larger bodied creatures. Most decks that are running Channeled Storm, like Telvanni, have a lot of small creatures like Thieves Guild recruits, merchants, camels, etc., that your opponents generally ignore and can easily pump Channeled Storm to 4 damage. Usually pumping it to 4 damage is so easy that we could almost say Channeled Storm usually does 4 damage. Getting it to 5, 6, that's a little bit more rare, more niche, because when you get to 5 to 6, you're starting to get closer to breaking runes, so Channeled Storm usually doesn't find that kind of value, but it can find that kind of value. But usually it doesn't need to find that kind of value. If it just deals 4 damage to a creature and removes a young mammoth, or finishes off a Sow of Revenge, or kills a lethal creature like even Old Velothi Assassin, it feels right. You don't feel bad about taking an Old Velothi Assassin with Channeled Storm. So a lot of people have chosen to choose this card over Reverberating Strike. And I think that's a preference thing, but I think Channeled Storm, from a data point of view, has actually been able to get more value than a Reverberating Strike. Like, Reverberating Strike is amazing when it gets full value, it hits 2 targets or something, but that's happening too rarely for it. That's tapping too rarely, and then Channeled Storm dealing 4 damage being relevant to take out a creature that a Crushing Blow could not take out is so common that Channeled Storm is seeing an ascendancy in popularity. Do I actually run this in any of my decks? No. I do not. But maybe I should. The reason is, at a high level, I'm not playing Tribunal, I'm not playing Telvanni. My Tribunal and Telvanni decks are still being built up. The collections are being built, so I have not felt the need to use a Channeled Storm. but I'm seeing this at higher levels of play used against me to great efficacy. Vanis's Scribe. 3-drop, 4/3, expertise, reduce the cost of a random creature in your hand by 1. He does not look like a high elf. Like, nothing about him looks like a high elf. Again, expertise is usually forgotten that it can be repeatedly triggered. So this guy, if he sticks on the board, can continuously reduce the cost of actions in your hand. I've actually seen this card used in some market variants. People seem to be experimenting it within market. His stats are reasonable. 3 cost, 4/3 is reasonable. Expertise ability seems to be very easy to trigger in this kind of deck. I mean, it seems like you'd run him in an action-heavy deck. So an action-heavy deck could trigger expertise because expertise can be triggered by items. It could also be triggered by actions. So I think this card is very playable. Arena playable, constructed playable. I think it can trade in well. I think it has engine value. It's not, his lack of popularity may be because the kind of deck that he would most shine in wasn't that popular to begin with. An action-heavy I would imagine an action-heavy deck is going to be a reactive deck. His good stats would not be used aggressively, but rather defensively. So he has to be fighting for the board. And that can be a little tricky because market is really defining the meta right now, where you can't afford to be too reactive in ladder. You have to be proactive. You have to have a way to close out the game turn 6, turn 7 against market. And just sitting back, reducing the cost of your actions, and then like waiting to play these super big actions like Dawn's Wrath, they're not doing anything for you in that particular matchup. So that's making it high risk to run that kind of deck. That being said, constructed, ladder, and tournament are different for that reason. It's okay to have a deck in tournament that is completely reactive. You could actually have a deck that is so control-oriented, so reactive, that instantly loses to market, but is just good against other kinds of decks, and it'll work fine because you have 4 decks to bring to a tournament, and it's not going to be a surprise when you run into market. So it's okay to pick your battles and say, I'm designing this deck to be very strong against these kinds of decks, and it's very weak against market because another deck in my lineup can deal with market no problem. Covenant Oathman. Okay, right off the bat, this is my favorite blue card in Alliance War that we have so far covered. This card is a monster. I'm running 3 copies in my Daggerfall Covenant aggro deck, and I've never felt bad drawing him. He's a card I'd even consider keeping in opening hand, even if I don't have the Ring of Magicka. It's a little risky too. It's a little risky because he is a combo piece in itself. He does kind of need, to get maximum value, you need to play him turn 5, turn 6. He's really the card you want to top deck after you've established a board presence. He's not necessarily the card you want to keep in your opening hand. But the reason why sometimes I'm tempted to keep him in opening hand is because if we can trigger him, the value he gets is game-changing. So let me explain how this card works. Summon. If you have a red card in play, draw a random item from your deck. Purple card in play, give an item in your hand, +2/+2. Doesn't sound dangerous, does it? It's dangerous. Why? Let's say you have a Nord Firebrand that's a 0 cost card into play. That counts for the red. Purple card in play. You have a Young Mammoth in play. When you play this card, he automatically draws you a card. Like, because giving an item in your drawing a random card in your item from your deck is basically a card draw. But he's drawing something specifically that you can set yourself up to use immediately. And if you run a lot of low cost items, Cloak and Dagger, Steel Scimitar. Let's look at Steel Scimitar. Steel Scimitar is a 1 Magicka +2/+2. When he triggers the +2/+2 onto that item, it's a 1 Magicka +4/+4. That makes it 3 times cheaper than a Young Mammoth. And actually faster than a Young Mammoth, because when you equip that Steel Scimitar, it gets the damage in immediately. The real dream pick up for this card, though, is Cloak and Dagger. Cloak and Dagger... Oh, I won't bring Cloak and... Should I bring it up? I should bring it up. Doesn't matter. Cloak and Dagger counts as 2 cards, okay? If you use Covenant Oathman and he finds Cloak and Dagger, the Cloak gets +2/+2, so Cloak would become 1 Magicka +2/+4. Dagger becomes 1 Magicka +4/+2. I mean, how crazy is that? You get a +4/+2 Dagger that costs 1, and then you get a +2/+4 Cloak. That means if you combine both of them, you get 2 Magicka +6/+6. +6/+6. What the... It was actually that very combo that convinced me to fine-tune and practice my Covenant deck, because I realized that that's insane. +6/+6, that means, okay, you played Covenant Oathman. Let's say you trigger him on curve, turn 4. Turn 5, you can put +6/+6 on this guy, for example, and he's an 8/10. He's an 8/10 on turn 5, hitting them for 2 Magicka. How's that? How do you deal with an 8/10? Like, there are a lot of decks that cannot deal with an 8/10. I mean, there are decks that can, okay, there are Javelins, right? And back to my recommendation earlier with Guildsworn Wayfarer, you don't want to actually make an 8/10, so that's kind of hyperbolic. Like, you don't actually want to put your Cloak and Dagger on the same creature. If you did that, you're opening yourself up to being vulnerable to single target removal. So generally speaking, you want to distribute the Cloak and the Dagger between different threats so that they have to deal with it individually and use more resources to deal with your board. A warning with Covenant Oathman is that there is a temptation to use Covenant Oathman in conjunction with Covenant Masterpiece, because, whoa, Covenant Masterpiece is an epic card. Covenant Masterpiece sounds cool. It looks cool. It's a masterpiece. It has so many cool keywords. But if you put a Covenant Masterpiece in your deck and you have Covenant Oathman, you're reducing the probability of finding Cloak and Dagger. I mean, that's huge. That's a really big problem. Like, if you put Covenant Oathman down and you're like, oh, he's going to get me a random item, what item is he going to get? And he gets you a Covenant Masterpiece, that's unusable. Like, it's actually unusable for good about 4 turns. And those 4 turns, if we just looked at it, if you had a Cloak and Dagger +6/+6, 6 times 4 is 24. That could have done 24 damage at its maximum. Why would you want a potato Covenant Masterpiece that is +5/+5? Like, it's a +5/+5 that comes in 4 turns later, and then it can't even attack on the turn. Oh, it could attack if you equip it onto somebody, but it's just 5 damage, which is less damage than Cloak and Dagger combined. It costs 4 times more. Like, Covenant Masterpiece is 8 cost. Cloak and Dagger is 2 cost. So that's 4 times more, and it does less. So to really make Covenant Oathman shine, you need to have less items in your deck. You need to actually have cheap items in your deck. Because you're not looking at big buff items to just say, look, I'm hitting you with an Ancestor's Battle Axe. Look how cool I am. You're looking at cheap Steel Scimitars, Cloak and Daggers, and you're looking at buffing those so that the value you get from a 1-cost card is out of control. Enchanted Plate is another great pickup, because when you have Enchanted Plate, if this card fetches Enchanted Plate, it's 2 cost, and that's +2/+5. Draw a card. Very relevant in a lot of matchups. Like, it can survive trades, very good for put it on a breakthrough creature. Drawing a card means you're not running out of fuel. Covenant has less card draw options than some of the other more green-based aggro decks. Halalu, Dominion, those guys are running Spoils of War, Ebonheart. So Enchanted Plate already makes a lot of sense in this kind of deck, just to get a little bit more card draw. On top of that, there's another synergy Covenant Oathman has, and that's Skilled Blacksmith. I feel Skilled Blacksmith and Covenant Oathman go hand in hand, along with Enchanted Plate, because when Skilled Blacksmith, who's a 2-drop 2/3, is in play, he turns that Cloak and Dagger combo into a 0-cost combo. So it's +6/+6, 0 cost. So that means, in theory, if you had a Skilled Blacksmith, a purple creature, and a red creature, on turn 4, you could Covenant Oathman and hit them with an 8/9 Blacksmith. Discounted. And for people who think that, hey, this doesn't happen, you're a 75 card deck, how often does this actually happen? It actually happens a lot. Like, getting the Skilled Blacksmith value, getting the Covenant Oathman value, these things happen with enough frequency at a high level of play where I think that you can consistently rely on it. It's a little bit like Sowers of Revenge, where you have Sowers of Revenge in your deck, and you just know that, hey, sometimes I'm not going to draw them, but you know that they're in your deck, and their presence will impact enough games that they're game winning. And that's the same way that this Cloak and Dagger strategy works, is when it goes off, and it does go off, it's the same thing as when you find that that top deck Soul of Revenge on turn 5. It wins the game. It's also important to note that one of the benefits, and this is what I'm going to say is more for control players, because I was more of a control player who started playing more aggro basically the last 2 weeks, is that control decks can play 30-minute games all the time. And then aggro decks can actually sometimes play 6-minute games. So you can actually get like 5 games in. Sometimes you can get 5 games of aggro in the same amount of time you got 1 control game. And that is another reason why you start to see you start to see things like, wait, I'm actually getting this Steel Scimitar combo quite often, because you're just able to roll more games, and then you're able to have more opportunities, and your ranking can go up pretty fast because you're just able to squeeze in more games. So if you lose a game on control, it can really feel bad, like, oh, I just lost a game. My next game is going to be another 30-minute game. But on aggro, it's like, I lost a game, who cares? Go queue in. If my deck good, if we have a 60% win rate, we're just going to, our rank will go up quite rapidly. Sparksmith. So I've heard good things about Sparksmith. I have not used it, and I don't know exactly how to use it. So, when a friendly creature equips an item, deal 1 damage to your opponent. Apparently, there is some kind of combination revolving Bandari Opportunist, Dunmer Guy without the pants, and Telekinesis. There's something there. Someone was sharing on the Discord about that you could do a crazy amount of damage with those cards. So this card, I would imagine, is some kind of combo piece. So when a friendly creature equips an item, deal 1 damage to your opponent. For 4 Magicka, 4/4 is reasonable. It's a little bit below par, because Bleak Coast Troll is the de facto 4-cost 5/5. That's what you want to be getting, a 5/5 for 4 Magicka. So to pay for 4 Magicka for 4/4, you need to get the value out of the ability to feel like you're break even. So when a friendly creature equips an item, deal 1 damage to your opponent, I don't think this was designed for, I'm going to put 1 item on this guy per turn and he's going to take 1 damage, and that's the value you're getting out of him. This is the kind of card that you're trying to like combo off and get a lot of cards, items. Maybe a skilled blacksmith would help this. Maybe those 1 Magicka items, that leaf item. There's a leaf item in green that every time you gain life, you get it back. Maybe there's something there. I haven't seen it done yet. But this card is definitely a combo piece with the potential of OTK if someone discovers what the loop is. You need to find, like, this card was designed with, hey, this card is saying we can kill people by equipping lots of items cheaply over and over and over again and then moving back and forth. If that combo is found, this would be a critical piece to it. People have not quite found that deck, to my awareness. Or if someone has found it, maybe it's still in need of fine-tuning. Maybe it has some weaknesses. Because I think one of the automatic weaknesses of this kind of item-based equipping deck is that you have a board state that your opponent can interact with. Like if you have a Sparksmith and then you need to equip items, the thing is it seems like a loop that requires interaction between the graveyard, between multiple creatures. It requires your opponent to basically not have silence and removal, which is very unreasonable. Like, it's reasonable for your opponents to have silence and removal. And this deck, in order to really go off, would need to be some kind of Spoils of War deck. So it needs to be some blue-green kind of combo, I think. Because without Spoils of War, you're not going to be able to OTK them. So, interested in seeing what people can discover with Sparksmith? It's worth noting that, so the combo, apparently the combo with the Dunmar Pants thing and this guy is a combination of Sparky Pants Studio, because Elder Scrolls Legends is now being developed by Sparky Pants Studio. Sparksmith, Spark, Dunmar Pants guy, Pants. So I think they have some kind of inside joke going on with this. Telekinesis. I think I've won 1 game in Arena with this card, where I had a really heavily itemed creature. So the idea that I used was, I had a creature that had some huge item, maybe an heirloom greatsword, hit them in the face. Then I just used telekinesis, move all the items onto another creature that hasn't attacked yet, then attack them in the face. So it basically gives your items a second chance to attack. And I think telekinesis synergizes somehow with Sparksmith Pants thing. But it's a little bit Magicka expensive. Like, as a combo, it's a little expensive. And as I said, it can be disrupted. Because there are silences, there are removals, but not only are there silences and removals, you're talking about Witherhand Cultist. A Witherhand Cultist would basically, just one Witherhand Cultist would make your little telekinesis stream just bye-bye. Yorin, make your abilities and items cost 1, your actions and items cost 1 more. Could be so disruptive. And that's makes your strategy too vulnerable. If your combo relies on your opponent doing nothing, that means your combo is going to be it's not going to be very consistent, because the better your opponents are, the more likely they will interact with your board and disrupt you. Maybe they'll banish your grave. Maybe they'll banish key cards. But telekinesis is definitely, in Arena, has the trick ability. So telekinesis is a little bit more flexible than maybe those combo pieces, because it can be used immediately as like it's kind of like another Swift Strike where you could hit them twice. But that also makes a very interesting question. Is Swift Strike not just straight better? Because a Swift Strike costs less, 3 magicka, and it allows you to attack with the same creature that's equipped with the items again. Which means that telekinesis is better when your items are not all on one creature, and Swift Strike is better when all the items are on a single creature, because if they're on one single creature, putting telekinesis again is basically as if you were attacking again, right? But this is at a much higher cost, Lion Guard Armaments. +3/+4 mobilize. If you put it on a lane, he's a 4/5 for 5. So it's interesting how this card is Arena playable. It's the kind of card that you love to see when you have a Harfinger Marauder, or you know those cards that generate random items. This is the type of card you wish it gets you. You get this card, you're just like, wow, my card just got huge. But paying full price for it, constructing a deck with it, feels a little awkward, feels a little slow. Like, getting this guy for free, I'm all in. Paying 5 for it, I'm out. Because 4/5 for a 5 as a creature is bad. Bleak Coast Troll is a 4-cost 5/5 that has upside of getting buffer. This has nothing special about that, right? And when you actually equip this as +3/+4 for 5 cost, isn't that blatantly worse than the Warhammer? There's a Warhammer that's +3/+3 breakthrough that I believe is 4 cost in red. So that strikes me. See, hammer. Yeah, this hammer is objectively better. It's just better, except for the mobilize. But if you were to use the mobilize, in the first place, it feels really bad because it's not even meant to be mobilizing of 4/5 is bad at 5 cost. Playing it on top of a creature to add reach, it has better alternatives. So this is the kind of card that I would say, hey, you don't want to be playing this card unless you have to. Like, when I say you have to, it's like you used Plunder and this card randomly shows up and it just happens to be your opponent needs 3 more life, or they have 3 more life, and if you put this on them, this finishes the game. And that's the kind of card, that's when it shines the most. Nyrad Sisters. So I've seen a couple people try to make this card work. And I think that there's another card in this game that basically says, get the next 3 keywords of the cards on the top of your deck. That's the card that pairs with this kind of well. It's a keyword heavy deck, and it makes only sense if you can get, like, the keywords you're trying to get are Charge Ward. Charge Ward. You have to play this with Manic Jack. I think the deck is very weak, that being said. And that shouldn't be a surprise because it's an RNG, high roll, I'm going to play Royal Sages mid-range deck that if you just got the wrong keywords, like imagine you got Breakthrough, Regeneration, Lethal on these Nyrad Sisters, kind of feels bad. Like you might, okay, Lethal is a great keyword to have. It's one of my favorite keywords. But it's incredibly irrelevant when you're talking about a 4/5. So like Lethal shines the most when you're talking about a very low cost 1/2 attack creature that can trade up and take out a bigger creature. You don't use lethal creatures to kill your opponent, you use them to kill other creatures. If Nairad's Sister is in the deck, chances are you're probably playing a dual color deck because you want to increase the chances of getting Nairad's Sister in the first place. And if you were using this card as some kind of like win condition, close people out kind of card, you are hoping it connects with the face. You don't want it to be attacking creatures, because the moment it starts attacking creatures, that means your opponent, who could be a very strong control deck, is getting further and further out of reach of being defeated. And a control deck has a very hard time imagining a control deck wanting to play this kind of card, because this kind of card, randomness and control are just two different concepts. Like they're like opposite. Like randomness means lack of control. Control means lack of randomness. So if you're playing this card into a control deck, you are a little confused about, are you trying to control things, or are you trying to have the excitement and the rush of serendipity? So I've only seen this played twice. I think I've won both those games. I think it's a cute card that they're sisters. But as for its speed, it's just too slow. I mean, another way of thinking about this is you need to compare this card to a Cliff Racer. Nairad's Sister basically wants to be getting charged. Like, charge is the number one keyword you're trying to get on this thing. But a 5-cost Cliff Racer already has charge and is 4/4. And usually when you're playing a charge creature, like a Cliff Racer, you actually don't care about its toughness. And that's actually imbued by the fact that Underworld Vigilante sees play. It's a 4/1. No one cares it's a 4/1, because his job is to connect with the face, and if he dies, it's okay. The 4/5 toughness in this means that this card is more about, like, the 5 stat line is less relevant than charge. So like if this was a 4/4 and had charge, we're talking Cliff Racer. So we're hoping this guy becomes a Cliff Racer. And the only advantage he has over a Cliff Racer is that he's got that extra toughness. And not only could he potentially get charge, she could potentially get other keywords. And when you're talking about the other keywords, Ward is the only one that stands out to me as something you really want. And the good news about that is Blue has a very good time of being able to give its creatures Ward. There are a lot of ways to give a Nairad's Sister Ward, at which point all the other Nairad's Sisters get Ward. I just thought about this. Maybe Galen the Shelterer could be a cool thing with Nairad's Sister. But that'd be a sorcerer deck. That's kind of funny. Because Galen could make more copies of this sister, and those sisters would be 7/8s. And if those 7/8s had charge and ward for 5 magicka, maybe this thing changes the equation. Because Galen is a big difference maker for a lot of decks that are trying to loop and create copies. So that makes sense that Galen would be a good card to pair with this with. I don't know what the name of the other card is. Let me try. Keywords. This card, Illusory Mimic. So Illusory Mimic, 5/5. Summon Illusory Mimic, gains all keywords that the top 3 cards of your deck has. This is the card that also synergizes with Nairad's Sister, because the idea is you're running a lot of keyword cards, and if this hits a Nairad's Sister with charge, it will get charge, ward, etc., etc., etc. Again, because of randomness and RNG, those who play such cards have no right to complain when their keywords suck, or when they do not actually hit they're Nyrad sisters. Like, it's possible you play this and it just doesn't hit. Like, you might have Galen charge. You might have Galen in some huge Nyrad sisters, and those Nyrad sisters might have charge, ward, breakthrough, all the dream stuff. And you play Illusory Mimic and he doesn't get hit a Nyrad sister. You have no right to be mad, because this deck is about randomness. And randomness means you're not going to get what you want when you want to get it. And that's what control is about. Control is about getting what you want when you want to get it. Oh. Ooh, we have not done Abner Thorn. I'll be right back. Let me get a cup of water. So before I move on, I want to comment something about control decks and randomness, because we're playing a computer card game, and computer card games have a lot of randomness inherently. Like, drawing cards is there's a chance element. Okay, it's not completely a game of skill. There's a skill involved, but it's a game of chance. So a control deck by nature actually has to deal with randomness. There's no way it can't deal with randomness, but there are different ways to control that randomness, and that's things like redundancy. So if you have redundancy in your deck, like if you have a lot of the same cards that do similar things, you're increasing the chances that you're going to get what you want. Also, a lot of control decks have a lot of card draw, and card draw, by having lots of more card draw, you're actually getting more options, and you're digging deeper, and you're actually increasing the amount of control you have over your situation by getting more cards. The problem with Nyrad Sister being run in a sorcerer deck is its card draw would be very low, and because the card draw is very low, you're increasing the randomness. So it's not like they may be opposites, but they are a scale. Like, there's a scale between randomness and control where you can shift yourself closer to one or the other. And Nyrad Sister, being a more aggressive card, is shifting towards embracing randomness overall. Okay, Solitaire. Solitaire, 5-cost action legendary, non-unique legendary. For each attribute your opponent is playing, banish the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. Empower +1 card per attribute. I think this is a cool card. I think it is an effective card. I think it's not the easiest card to get full value out of, and if you're able to get full value out of it, it can win the game. You could actually kill your opponent with this card. So for each attribute your opponent is playing, so this card shines the most against, does it really shine? Let's just check it out. If they have a mono attribute card, you banish 2 cards. So it's bad against monocolor. It's fine. Monocolor is usually not that common. Dual color. Banish 2. So you're basically 4. 4 cards banished per for dual color. Empower is +1. So if you hit them twice, If you hit them twice, you're banishing 8 cards from their deck. Because it's saying banish the top 2 cards per attribute. That's 4 for dual color, already 4. +1 per attribute, so you hit them twice, so you empowered it twice, so 2 times 2, 4, so it's 8. So if you banished 8 cards from their deck, there are a lot of situations where, see, banishing 8 cards from the deck is not sufficient. So this is the problem with Soul Shred. If you banished 8 cards from their deck, that will not be enough to win the game against a dual color deck. But if you banish 16 cards from their deck, that can be enough to win the game. So in order to get Soul Shred's full value, we need to start talking about how can we banish 16 cards, about 16 cards from their deck. And one of the easiest ways to do that would be the Mushroom Tower. I don't say easiest because it's not that easy. You need things like Mushroom Tower to Betray, to basically give this spell Betray so you could actually cast it twice. You need to find a way to loop your actions. Maybe an Aaron, but that's unlikely. It's unlikely Aaron can get you Soul Shred back, because if you ran this kind of card, you're running so many different types of actions. Hold on one second. Okay, I'm going to continue on Soul Shred. So, I think if you banish at least 16 cards from the deck, it's reasonable, because cards like, it's possible to stall out people to draw 20 cards, and then you use Soul Shred. The whole idea of using Soul Shred is you mill them, where they kill themselves with no cards left in their deck. So how that works is, in Elder Scrolls Legends, if you run out of cards to draw, you actually lose your next rune every single time you're supposed to draw a card. So if you're at 30 health and someone Soul Shreds you and you have 0 cards left in your deck, the next card you were supposed to draw brings you to 25 health and breaks 1 rune. The second card you draw would bring you to 20 health and break a second rune. So in theory, it would take 6 more card draws. If you were at full health, it would take just 6 card draws to kill you. And this is how does this work if you have more than 30 health, LEC? Well, if you had 60 health, let's say a person had only 1 rune left and 60 health. So they healed themselves back to 60. If you used Soul Tear, if they start overdrawing, like they have no more cards in their deck, they would actually take 55 damage on the next card draw, and it would break their next rune. So it works like Lyris Titanborn, and it just breaks them all. It goes to their last rune. So Soul Shred's a cool card. I think you cannot play this card unless you have 3 of them in your deck. So this is a card you want 3 in your deck. Would this be better in a dual color deck or a tricolor deck? I think it'd probably be better in a dual color deck. Probably really good in Mage. Mage has a lot of potential because there's a funny card called Shadowfoot Thief, who steals a card from the top of your deck and leaves that counterfeit token. That card synergizes with this because that card's actually milling them. It actually not only steals a card from their deck, it actually takes out 2 cards of their deck because you're stealing 1 card and you're helping them draw a little faster. Because when they use the counterfeit token, they draw another card. So it actually gets them 2. Every time you play a Shadowfoot, they're 2 cards closer to dying from milling. So let's say what happens if you banish 3. So if you're against a tricolor deck, banish the top 2. So that means 6. It's by default banish 6 cards. So then it becomes intervals of 3. So it becomes 6, 9, 12. Every time you empower it. So it's default to banish 6 cards from a tricolor deck. If you empower it once, it's 9. If you empower it twice, it's 12. You empower it 3 times, it's 15 cards. And that's kind of the area we're trying to get to, where we're trying to banish 15, 18, 16 cards. And if you could do that, just do it playing Soul Shred once, or if you can do that by betraying, that'd be huge. Like if you were able to Soul Shred 15 cards, betray it, and Soul Shred another 15 cards, that sounds like a consistent game plan that could go off. Although I'm a little worried about how you empower this Soul Shred. Maybe there's a Dominion deck that could do this, because Dominion right now has a lot of interesting ways to stay alive and to empower itself. With drain creatures such as Golden Saint, Golden Initiate, 3/3 Drain Prophecy, the 3/3 Dominion Battle Reeve. These cards might be interesting with Soul Shred because they might be able to empower. Because you need cards to empower this to make it really, really work. You need creatures. So you can't just be a deck that says, I'm just Soul Shredding you and you're just playing actions and being reactive and removing things from the board. You actually need to have guys poking. And I wouldn't even be surprised that at a certain stage, there would be an attack phase in this strategy where you would actually want to break runes to help them draw more. Like, so let's say you're trying to kill them. Well, you're trying to break runes. So that by milling them in this game, you actually need to break their runes, and you actually need to get them to draw too many cards. So breaking runes makes them draw more cards, so that can be helpful in terms of taking them out. Right now, Soul Shred seems to be functional mainly as a surprise tactic because people aren't familiar with the card. So it definitely can win games based off of surprise. But if people were to focus down and say, hey, how do we optimize decks to make Soul Shred a consistent win con? It could be a thing. There are also classes of decks, such as Journey to Sovngrad decks, that are actually heavily based in drawing a lot of cards. So there are decks that exist, such as Abomination, Doomcrag Vampire. These decks are already trying to draw their entire deck. And those decks would be exceptionally vulnerable to Soul Shred because we can use their strategy and judo it against them because they're using Namira Shrines to quickly draw through their deck. They're using Disciples of Namira. Well, they're almost drawing their whole deck out, and they need to draw a very specific card out. Soul Shred could potentially remove their win conditions from their deck, remove the Journey to Sovngrad. It can make their deck. It can they're accelerating what Soul Shred's even trying to do. So that's an interesting point where Soul Shred could target specific decks. And let's think about Market, for example. I haven't seen Soul Shred versus Market. It's probably a little difficult to see because Market's a dual-colored deck. And Market does have Debilitate, which can remove empower creatures that would otherwise empower Soul Shred. But from my experience, Market decks are actually drawing through their whole deck very, very quickly. So maybe what if you played Vanis, the guy, Vanis's Scribe, who reduces actions costs. Then you use Soul Shred at a discounted price, and you use Soul Shred against Market, and we're able to take out their deck because they have a limited amount of ammunition. Market decks have a limited amount of ammunition, and if they use all their ammunition and they can't kill you, they automatically lose. So Soul Shred could potentially create that kind of situation by milling them. Because they're very efficient already. In general, these Market Assassins and Market Archers are so efficient with card draw that they are already almost milled to begin with. So I probably will not craft additional copies of Soul Shred because it's its own deck. Like a Soul Shred deck would need to be a Soul Shred deck. But I would be excited to pick up a second or third copy from packs or later down the road and to give it a try. But because there are so many cards I'm lacking in my collection, I can't afford to do that. Hence why I'm theory crafting, because I can't try it. Staff of Ice. So if you have Soul Shreds, please try it. Like, please, I want to see it work. Like, if Soul Shred just completely annihilates Market, destroys Namir, these old Zubkrag sort of Abomination decks. Abomination showed up a lot, so that'd be really cool. Staff of Ice. 5 cost, Prophecy, Mobilize, +1/+1. The wielder deals 2 damage. This is the kind of card that is so good as a Prophecy, and it's so bad if you played it from hand. So my general rule with these kind of Prophecy cards is I only put Prophecy cards in my deck if it feels good to play it from hand. Shrieking Harpy, that's a kind of card. It's 2-drop, 2/1, Shackle. No one feels bad playing that card from hand. And when it comes from a Prophecy, you feel amazing. Lightning Bolt, same way. Covenant Breastplate, that I feel identical. Staff of Ice, 5 cost. Oh my, the cost is prohibitive. The +1/+1, the +1/+1 part is like completely irrelevant. To be really honest with you, +1/+1, 5 magic cost is just bad. It just doesn't seem like it's going to make a difference. The wielder deals 2 damage. Okay, this is like a Lightning Bolt Prophecy, but does half the damage of Lightning Bolt Prophecy. Like, Lightning Bolt can go to face and it can go to creatures. It can target your own creatures and can target their creatures. So it has the same flexibility of Staff of Ice. But Staff of Ice is objectively worse because it costs more and it has irrelevant +1/+1. So, I mean, in theory, you could say, let's just add all the stats up. Someone breaks a rune. Staff of Ice comes out. You choose to mobilize. So that means you create a 1/1 recruit, you +1/+1. That's two stats. Then it does 2 damage. That means Staff of Ice is doing 4. It's basically doing 4 stats. It's having 2 attack. It's having 2 attack. It's having 2 damage. But the 2 attack is not even relevant because it can't make a difference at that moment. All right, Lightning Bolt can make a difference. All 4 damage is applied and effective the moment the Prophecy is triggered. Staff of Ice, if you were to mobilize it, is 2 stats of not moving. The 2 of stats that doesn't do anything until your turn. The wielder dealing 2 damage, so that means even in the best case scenario, this is worse than a Lightning Bolt. But that being said, if you were to draft this in Arena, it could be, this is the kind of card that ends up in your Arena deck when the other 2 cards that are available to draft are garbage. And then when you have this in your deck, when this triggers on a prophecy, this can be a game-winning prophecy. So it's not like, it's so trash if you played it from hand. It's worse than a lightning bolt, but in an arena format where you don't have access to putting a bunch of lightning bolts in your deck, putting a staff of ice, it happens. And I've definitely had this card show up and win games, take out key cards, sometimes from plunder. Cards that generate random cards where this card shows up, you can use this card. Like this card, this is the type of card that you can use in those situations. And sometimes it feels, from a game design standpoint, people created Staff of Ice and stuff like this to lower the probability of people getting really good items off of those cards. So like, and that makes sense. Just think about it. If there were only good card items in the game, and Plunder reads 2 Magicka, generate 2 random items, and there were only good items in the game, then Plunder would become this tier 1 insane card. So they actually need to balance those RNG-based cards by including crappy items in the game. So this is an example of a crappy item in the game. So it's like, oh, when you use Plunder, you don't automatically get Steel Scimitars whenever you want. It's like, if you had use Plunder, get 2 Steel Scimitars, that would be broken. So they need to make sure it's like, oh, maybe you get a Steel Scimitar, but maybe you get a Staff of Ice. So that justifies the existence of this card. So 2 more and then lunchtime. Abner Tharn. Okay. This card is considered by many to be the best card in Alliance War. And I think I might have to agree. Like, Abner Tharn is the power level of Abner Tharn is amazing. His ability basically allows you to clone any other creature's summon ability, which includes your opponent's summon creatures. So like, if your opponent has an Odiving, you could use Abner Tharn, click their Odiving, and all of a sudden all their board takes 4 damage, and you got a half-price Odiving. That's the kind of things he can do. Let's say your opponent has a Shadowfen Priest and a Namira Shrine. You can use Abner Tharn, click the Shadowfen Priest, shoot down their Namira Shrine. I don't think there's ever been a situation where people got Abner Tharn in their hand and they were like, man, I wish I didn't have this card in my hand. Because Abner Tharn's flexibility, everybody plays summon creatures with summon abilities. And if you... The only time Abner Tharn's bad is when there's no creatures on the board. So because then he's not even playing. Like, you can't play a naked Abner Tharn and summon and use the ability of another creature there's nothing to target. That would be quite wasteful. But another good synergy with Abner Tharn is Ordurnian Necromancer. Let's say your opponent has an Ordurnian Necromancer. You can use Abner Tharn, use his ability on Necromancer, and Necromancer's ability reads, bring back a creature that's power is less than Necromancer. What happens is Abner Tharn becomes bring back a creature whose power is less than Abner Tharn. So you could actually bring back 4 power and 3 power creatures. So you're actually going to have a much more powerful summon than the previous guy. So if you used Abner Tharn on an opponent's Necromancer, and you had a 4/4, like a Shadowfen Priest in your grave, you can bring that Shadowfen Priest right back. Abner Tharn also synergizes really well with cards like Ulfric's Uprising. Ulfric's Uprising allows people's summon ability to trigger again. So let's say you used Abner Tharn's summon ability already, he's already on the board, and he's just sitting there. 5/5 toughness, no one's killed him yet. Well, with Ulfric's Uprising, you can choose a new ability to copy. Like, you don't have to do the same one you started out with. You can use Abner Tharn, look at who's got the most powerful summon ability in the entire board state, and just clone it. It doesn't even feel bad to use Abner Tharn to copy a Harpy sometimes and just shackle something. That's the kind of card this guy is. He copies a shackle, 2-drop shackle. It doesn't feel bad. And so from there, it's all upside. He can copy Mana Marco. So your opponent has Mana Marco, plays Mana Marco, steals a creature from your grave. Well, you could play Abner Thorn, target Mana Marco, steal a creature from their grave. Their opponent plays Marok, and Marok's a creature from you. You play Abner Thorn, steal Marok's ability, and then you could steal back the creature that he just stole from you. So Abner Thorn has so many creative use cases. Another very common use of Abner Thorn is to combo it with Laneth. So Laneth reads something like, draw any card from your deck, right? So people are willing to pay 9 cost for that, right? If you do that, if you feel, okay, this is especially true if you have a lot of Magicka, because it's actually possible in Telvanni to ramp up using Thorn Hiss Mages, using Tree Minders. It's possible to ramp up into a situation where you have 15 Magicka. 15 Magicka means you could play Laneth, 9 cost, into Abner Tharn, into using Abner Tharn's ability on Laneth. So you use Laneth to draw Abner Tharn, you use Abner Tharn to draw Laneth, to target Laneth to draw another card of your choice. And Telvanni has that ability. And usually when they're doing things like that, the card they're drawing is Ulfric's Uprising. Because then what happens is you use Ulfric's Uprising to trigger off Laneth drawing another card, and then Abner Tharn copying either Laneth and drawing another card, and then you can get another Uprising. Last year, no, that wasn't last. Abner Tharn wasn't even around last year. But 6 cost, 5/5 body. Another use case of Abner Tharn is Ancano. Ancano, 8 cost, deal 5 damage to the face. Abner Tharn copying that can be very, very useful. So he's sometimes seen as like a cop. He's a budget Ancano. Like in some situations he's an Ancano. In some situations he's a Laneth. In some situations he's a Harpy. Like he has the ability to be all over the place. So if you do not have Abner Tharn, I would actually recommend crafting him if you play blue, because Abner Tharn is a must-have and is actually seeming to be almost auto-include in so many different decks running blue right now. It doesn't matter if you're Telvanni, it doesn't matter if you're Dagoth, it doesn't matter if you're Tribunal. Covenant is one of the decks that might be struggling with putting Abner Tharn in him, because Covenant mid-range, Covenant control has not been really, has not shown itself to be high performing yet, so people are still not able to put it there, because Abner Tharn's more of a control card than an aggro card. So Covenant's the only one that seems to be not auto including him at the moment. I actually read an article from the designers who made Abner Tharn, and they said that Abner Tharn and Sai Sahan had swapped abilities during development. So that means Abner Tharn used to be play him, deal 1 damage to all creatures, or all enemy creatures get -1/-1. He's immune to wounded creatures. And then Sai Sahan had the use the summon ability of a creature, and they were like, oh, it's because he's a martial artist, and martial artists can use your opponent's weaknesses or strengths against them. So that's kind of funny that at one stage of design their abilities were swapped. I think it makes more sense this way, but it's cool. Mage's Guild Conjurer, our final blue card. Expertise, summon a Flame Atronach, then upgrade the Atronach Mage Guild Conjurer summons. Let me look at this more carefully. So I'm a little unclear on this card, how this card works. I've played against it. I've actually lost against this card quite a few times. This card seems interesting. I have 3 of them, so I should give it a spin in Guildsworn. This deck usually shows up in Guildsworn, and it seems very easy to trigger. The expertise triggers pretty easily with the presence of 0-cost forked bolts, improvised weapons granted from Guildsworn Oathman. And usually when he can get to the Frost Atronach, you've probably lost. So like if this thing sticks on the board and is not immediately removed after the Flame Atronach, it snowballs into a win condition. What I'm confused about is I can't really remember how this works. So if you played a Mage's Guild Conjurer and the Flame Atronach is summoned, I'm not sure if that. Let's say you kill the Flame Atronach and you trigger expertise again. The next one's a Frost Atronach, or it's like, oh, it's a Flame Atronach. You didn't kill the Flame Atronach. It triggers expertise. Flame Atronach turns into a Frost Atronach. Oh, you killed the Frost Atronach? Oh, then it's going to go back to summoning Flame Atronachs. Or does it just level up? Does it level up regardless of what happens to that creature? Like, let's say you kill the Flame Atronach, his next expertise is a Frost Atronach. You kill the Frost Atronach, the next one's a Storm Atronach. I'm not sure what that is, and that would require a little bit more in-depth testing, or at least seeing. But I do know this card is very powerful. I've never seen it summon a Lapa Atronach, but I've seen it summon a Storm Atronach, at which point I'm basically dead. And this is, so my deck that struggles so hard with this kind of card is my Scout deck. So I don't think my Slay deck would ever be afraid of this card, but my Scout deck doesn't really have a good way to kill a 2/3 in Shadow Lane, which is kind of embarrassing because, like, they just put this in a Shadow Lane with, and what am I going to do? I'm going to use Debilitate. Debilitate doesn't kill it. Lethal Creature, Shackle, Sanctuary Pet doesn't kill it. Territorial Viper can't get in there. I mean, Odahviing could, so Odahviing's a good answer, but Odahviing is a turn 12 play, or you have to ramp into it. So Odahviing usually can't come in time. So Mage's Guild Conjurer seems to be a card that has preferred matchups. Like, it is straight wiped out by Ice Storm, but Ice Storm isn't a card that I'm even seeing a lot of at the moment. Like, Ice Storm's not a card. Ice Storm is an auto-include in Tribunal and some blue decks like Telvanni, right? But those cards, those decks types are not those decks are not doing very well on ladder. They're doing well in tournament because you could protect Tribunal, you can protect Telvanni in tournament play with your different bans and stuff like that. But in terms of laddering, I'm not actually running into Tribunal or Telvanni very often, and when I do, they're usually too slow because we're in a meta where Covenant is able to bring up a lot of aggro pressure. Dominion is able to bring up a lot of aggro pressure, and that aggro pressure sometimes has jagged bodies where an Ice Storm is not a full clear. And these control decks, Tribunal and Telvanni, they, to me, Ebonheart Slay can take them out pretty easily. Because Tribunal is trying to be a late game deck, Telvanni is trying to be a late game deck, but the king of late game right now is Ebonheart Slay. And that fact alone makes those control decks a little bit in a tight spot where they're Ice Storm reliant removal. Their decks rely on Ice Storm to stabilize the board. But Ice Storm is not able to stabilize the board against some of these decks that have young mammoths and big fat creatures with ward that apply a lot of aggressive pressure. And on the top end, while they do have access to really cool tools like Murok, Sothicil. Some of those cards just suck against unstoppable rage decks. So like let's say you play Sothicil. I could play a Fighters Guild Recruit Unstoppable Rage. Or I could just use Archer's Gambit, and that problem is dealt with. So why does this tie in with Mage's Guild Conjurer? Is because in the big scheme of things, Mage's Guild Conjurer sucks in a world where Ice Storm is really prevalent. But it's really good in a world where Ice Storm decks aren't that popular. Granted, there are a lot of other ways to remove Mage's Guild Conjurer. You could use Crushing Blow, you could use Channeled Storm, you could use Lightning Bolt. But there are matchups. The Scout matchup was an example where Mage's Guild Conjurer is a real pain in the ass to remove. Like there are decks that just can't actually remove it very easily. So this card's also very mid-rangey by nature. It's not a card that a control deck would want to run, and it's not a card that an aggro deck would want to run. It's too slow for aggro, and it's not... the reason why it's not a very good control card, like in Tribunal, why would Control Tribunal not run this card? Because Control Tribunal is running Ice Storms, and if this card's weak against Ice Storms, how can you play a card that's weak against Ice Storms and rely on Ice Storm? Because then you're putting yourself in a weird position where if you were to play this and Ice Storm, you could really only play one or the other without hurting yourself. So Guildsworn mid-range is definitely the deck that this was created for. Because as a mid-range engine, it seems like the stats are very bad on purpose because it has the ability to get out of control. Like this card screams, this card dies very easily, but if it doesn't die, you're going to die. That's what this card's basically reading. So we need to find ways to protect it. And ways to protect are interesting because items could protect it from certain threats. Guildsworn has access to red, blue, and red and blue. Battle Mage colors have a lot of items to equip to this, potentially. But if you rely on items to buff him up and protect him, single target removal opens him up. They've got access to ward crafters who could protect him from some kinds of things like lethal pings, etc., etc. So my assumption is the best way to protect Mage's Guild Conjurer is to not protect him. It's to actually apply pressure. It's to create too many threats in a world where Ice Storm does not exist. That's probably the best way to get value out of Mage's Guild Conjurer, is because Guildsworn already has shown the ability to swarm the board with a lot of relevant, cheap, durable threats. Guildsworn Oathman is an example of this. A 5-cost 4/6 that gives you 2 expertise triggerers. He's really hard to remove from the board. Like it's like, let's say the Guildsworn Oathman hits the ground. He's a 4/6. Usually, people feel bad about Piercing Javelin, a card like that, because he's already got value. Like, even if you removed him, he got full value from being removed because he's 5 costs himself. And if you Javelined him, you're not stopping the improvised weapon. You're not stopping the forked bolt. You're only taking some damage off the board. So he basically wins that trade. So in a world where you remove a Guildsworn Oathman with a Piercing Javelin, any 5-cost removal, they are going to come out on top from that exchange. On top of that, he doesn't fall to things that are 1 through 4 removal. He doesn't die to Ice Storm. He doesn't die to Lightning Bolt. He doesn't die to Channeled Storm unless you empowered it twice. And that's the kind of setup that is good probably with the Mage's Guild Conjurer, is when you put out threats that demand an answer, and when your opponent answers them, they start to run out of removal options in their hand, and then Mage's Guild Conjurer comes in to seal the deal. So you don't want to be playing naked Mage's Guild Conjurers because he's pretty vulnerable. But if your opponent has been using removal spells on other cards leading up to Mage's Guild Conjurer's appearance onto the board, that's the setup that he wants, this card wants. And that's pretty much the fill in the blank moment for your opponent, is when they use their Edict of Azuras, when they used their Archer's Gambits on other cards just to stay alive, and they see a Mage's Guild Conjurer hit the field. And then trigger. So in these kind of mid-range decks, I have yet to experiment with them. I would imagine the top end of these decks are very lightweight, very light. Like, you don't want to run this card into a very late game oriented deck, because you want Mage's Guild Conjurer to be the late game of that deck. You want Mage's Guild Conjurer to be the seal, so to speak. Because if you have a lot more cheaper threats in your deck, you could build up that board state that creates a safe environment for Mage's Guild Conjurer to then close out the game. And maybe it's okay to run like an Ancano in this kind of deck. That's fine. Ancano is super good. So he's an 8-cost card, but in those kind of decks, you probably would not want to go past Ancano cost, and Ancano would probably be the only card. You might not even put Abner Tharn in that deck. You could, but in those kind of decks, getting out those threats early to pave the way for your final push is the game plan. Hello, guitarist on bass. Okay, so let me ask you a question, guitarist, before I head out. If I am using this card, Mage's Guild Conjurer, I trigger Expertise, I get a Flame Atronach. Flame Atronach survives. I trigger Expertise again. That Atronach becomes a Frost Atronach. And then if that Frost Atronach was to die, and I trigger Expertise the next turn, I get a Storm Atronach. But if that, so it's like, regardless of whether it dies or lives, the next Atronach comes out. So basically, if you kill the Atronach, you're not dealing with the problem, because the Mage's Guild Conjurer upgrades that thing. And if you do kill it, it doesn't matter, because he summons the upgraded one. Is that correct? Oh, okay. This card's scary. And something to note, like, I think Expertise is a very good keyword, is that in the future, and you're welcome to correct me anytime. I'm glad you're saying what you said. I think Expertise and Veteran keywords, their power level will be tied with the release of new cards with those keywords. So at the moment, these cards represent a certain power level, but because they're new keywords, there's only a limited set of Expertise cards. There's only a limited set of Veteran cards, right? That card that says, Mournhold Taskmaster, all cards with Veteran have charge, becomes exponentially better the more Veteran cards are added into the game. So if Expertise gets more love and stuff like that, then Mage's Guild Conjurer's ability can spike up far greater. So thanks for watching. I'm going to post this on YouTube, and I guess it seems pretty unwatchable. It's literally 2 hours of talking about blue. So thanks for watching, and you're welcome to show up next time.